Okay, so Donald Trump, he did an interview talking about Iran and how many conflicts they've been starting over in the Middle East and how uh, provocative they have been and how we can't let them get nuclear weapons and how the Iran deal was a horror show. And even though his whole point is, well, I don't want war with Iran, but we can't let them get nuclear weapons, then the obvious question is, then why'd you back out of the Iran deal, which they complied with, that would prevent them from getting nuclear weapons? And both our European allies and the IAEA certified that Iran was completely complying with the deal and got rid of 97% of the enriched uranium that they had, and will only enrich up to a number around 3.6% now, when you need almost 90% for it to be weapons grade. So those are just some numbers for how much the Iran deal did in terms of keeping Iran from actually developing a nuclear weapon or enriching uranium even remotely close to how much they would need it to be enriched for getting a nuclear weapon. But who cares? Donald Trump's going to just talk out of both sides of his mouth like he always does, and then at least some people that are his supporters just hear one thing that he said and think he's in favor of this, even when he's in favor of that, and he just talks out of both sides of his mouth and lies and is disingenuous to just keep the confusion up, and that way anybody that supports him can say he's in favor of this, even when he's also made other statements in favor of the opposite. So that's the case that we're in right now, and obviously we're being extremely provocative with Iran and then accusing Iran of being extremely provocative with us, even though we're the ones that are consistently instigating it. So here's Donald Trump explaining his stance on this, and then I'll be back for more.
Welcome back, everyone. Is the United States heading towards another Middle East showdown, this time with Iran? It's making big news this week, and it's one of the things I asked President Trump directly about in the Rose Garden.
Let's move on to another hotspot, Iran,
Right.
Middle East.
Right.
Tell us what your analysis is of what's going on right now.
Well, look, Iran's been a problem for so many years. If you go back, just take a look at all of the conflict that they've caused. And the deal that President Obama made was a horror show, the Iran nuclear deal, because basically it says that in 5 years from now, they're going to have an open path to making nuclear weapons. We don't need another country with that. And frankly, especially them. We don't need it. So he made this terrible deal, paid $150 billion, paid $1.8 billion in cash. That means cash, like, I mean, out of your pocket. Cash, green. Nobody's ever heard of a thing like that. I don't know if you've ever seen at a casino promotion $1 million in $100 bills. It's a lot of area. What's $1.8 billion like? So he paid all of this money, made a terrible deal. We don't have good inspection rights. We're not even allowed to, we weren't even allowed to inspect some of the most important sites, like military bases, certain things, where they would do it. Okay. The deal was terrible. When I first came to office, one of the first meetings I had was at the Pentagon with generals, and they were showing me the Middle East. And they had 14 or 15 sites where there was nothing but war, problems. Every single one of those sites was instigated by Iran. It was Iran military. It was people paid by Iran. It was just, you have no idea. It was just, I said, this is terrible. They were so strong. I ended the Iran nuclear deal. And actually, I must tell you, I had no idea it was going to be as strong as it was. It totally, the country is devastated from the standpoint of the economy.
But now you see, the thing that I think a lot of people are worried about is that they heard what you said in 2016 and liked it when you said no more stupid wars. And then they hear these stories about troops and so on.
I just don't want them to have nuclear weapons. And they can't be threatening us. And you know, with all of everything that's going on, and I'm not one that believes, you know, I'm not somebody that wants to go into war, because war hurts economies, war kills people, most importantly, by far most importantly. Right. I think that if you look, when I went to North Korea, there were nuclear tests all the time. There were missiles going up all the time. We had a very rough time. Then we got along. We'll see what happens right now. Right now, I don't think I told him when I left Vietnam, when we had the summit, I said to Chairman Kim, and I think very importantly, I said, look, you're not ready for a deal, because he wanted to get rid of 1 or 2 sites, but he has 5 sites. I said, what about the other 3 sites? That's no good. We're going to make a deal. Let's make a real deal. but they haven't had any tests over the last 2 years. It's zero. There's a chart, and it shows 24 tests, 22 tests, 18 tests. Then I come, and once I'm there for a little while, you know, we went through a pretty rough rhetorical period, but once I'm there for a little while, no tests, no tests, no tests. So let's see what happens.
So
but you cannot let Iran have nuclear weapons.
You can reassure people you're not looking for some kind of conflict in Iran. And
well, I'm the one that talks about these wars that are 19 years and people are just there. And don't kid yourself, you do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war. You know, in Syria with the caliphate. So I wipe out 100% of the caliphate. That doesn't mean you're not going to have these crazy people going around blowing up stores and blowing up things. These are seriously ill people. I don't want to say, oh, they're wiped out, you know, ISIS. But I wiped out 100% of the caliphate. I say, I want to bring our troops back home. The place went crazy. They want to keep, you have people here in Washington. They never want to leave. I say, you know what I'll do? I'll leave a couple of hundred soldiers behind. But if it was up to them, they'd bring thousands of soldiers in. Someday people will explain it.
Well, this is an example.
You do have a group, and they call it the military-industrial complex. They never want to leave. They always want to fight. No, I don't want to fight. But you do have situations like Iran. You can't let them have nuclear weapons. You just can't let that happen.
So there you go. So there's Donald Trump's explanation. I mean, could that be more hypocritical if you tried? I mean, first off, not only the fact that he's saying all this violence in the Middle East that's happening because of Iran, and then you have Saudi Arabia, who we're selling weapons to, and we're helping them reload jets for a genocide that they're carrying out in Yemen. And he vetoes a bill to try and get us out of the war in Yemen. So we're trying to rinse our hands clear of a genocide, and he vetoes that. So that's just a start in terms of how hypocritical he is. And then on top of that, then he's saying, well, we can't have Iran getting a nuclear bomb. Can't have them getting nuclear weapons. Okay? So the deal did that. And they were complying with the deal. So they weren't on pace to get any nuclear weapons. Like, this is what's so annoying about Donald Trump and Republicans in general, is that they frame things like this. Oh, it was a terrible deal. And what we're doing is trying to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. But then anybody that pays attention to politics says, well, wait, wasn't the whole point of the Iran deal to keep them from getting nuclear weapons? And aren't all of our European allies saying that, yes, they've been complying? The IAEA, the agency that's in charge of monitoring this type of thing, that's checking in on Iran, says they're complying with everything fully. They can't enrich above 3.67% in terms of uranium enrichment. It has to be at like 90% for it to actually be weapon grade. And they can't have more than 660 pounds of it at a time, which they complied with, which means they basically got rid of about 97% of what they had before to comply with the deal. So you just can't make an argument that the Iran deal was helping Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Just because they were allowed to enrich uranium to 3.67%, that is just reactor-grade uranium. That is nothing that is going to build a nuclear weapon. They would have to enrich so much more than that and have so much more uranium than they do right now. It's just laughable that anybody would say, you know what, the Iran deal had Iran on a highway to getting nuclear weapons. And the reason that I ruined the Iran deal is because I saw a tremendous opportunity to stop them from having weapons. Just shut up. Shut up. It's so annoying. And then the fact that people actually would believe this from Donald Trump is just incredible. I mean, obviously there's a lot of Kool-Aid drinkers out there, but come on, man. The Iran deal was literally a diplomatic approach to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon, with the IAEA checking in on them all the time to make sure that they weren't ever enriching uranium past a certain point, and to make sure that they had nothing that was on pace for building weapon-grade uranium at all. So they had no way of building the weapons. They had an agency that was coming in and checking on them. Our allies say everything's working and it would do more harm than good to get out of the deal. So what does Donald Trump do? Well, Barack Obama did it, so I'm getting out of the deal. It's ridiculous. And just another stat for you here. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile before the deal more than 25,000 pounds. Seems pretty hefty. So what about after the deal? Did it go up to 35,000 pounds? No, it's down to 660 pounds, which is a limit that they had to meet to be able to comply with the deal. So they complied. What did we do? We backed out and said that they were trying to do something with weapons anyway, and that was a horror show of a deal. Even though they complied, and the whole point of the deal was for them to comply. And now that's a horror show. So now let's cut the deal off, and that'll work, right? And then they go back to enriching uranium more. So, the entire point of... So in Trump's mind, I think it's a little bit more complicated. Not because he's intelligent, but because I don't think he gets what he's doing as he's going along. So in terms of a lot of the neocons in his administration and all of the generals and people like John Bolton that are now whispering in his ear, I think they're fully in favor of getting rid of the Iran deal to be hawkish with Iran, to put those punishing sanctions back onto Iran and make Iran start to be unstable and try and get them to lash out and then have an excuse to invade. That's what they're looking for. And I think Donald Trump wants that. But at the same time, I think there was a point with the Iran deal when Donald Trump was running against it originally, and maybe even initially when he got into office, where he wasn't saying that he wanted to go to war with Iran necessarily, but he didn't connect the dots to the fact that, you know what, it is going to be very hawkish if we start putting sanctions back on and get rid of the Iran deal, because he's thinking in his head, well, Barack Obama did that, and he looks at that as a foreign policy accomplishment, so I have to smear that as much as I can and trash it, and then I'll put it, and I'll get rid of it, and then we'll do something new, and then I'll get all the accolades for it. But I don't think he connected the dot to, hey, this is going to lead to extremely high tensions, and this is going to lead to them bringing back the uranium program that they had before, and starting to enrich uranium past 3.67% again. So you have... I think he was an idiot at first. But then after that, then I think he just bought in with everything that John Bolton and all the neocons in Washington, D.C. want him to do, at least on the conservative side of things, and maybe a couple on the Democratic side, but not many, which is to invade Iran. I cut the video, but then I actually wanted to address one more thing. So Donald Trump, all those numbers that he was talking about, that $150 billion that we gave Iran, or that $1.8 billion that he says that we also gave Iran, what he's talking about there is the $150 billion number that he's referring to is the amount of assets that we freed back up for Iran once we lifted those sanctions for the nuclear program. So, and that number is not correct. So if you go to PolitiFact, they estimate, there's a bunch of estimates around what the exact number is. I think back in 2015, here, I'll give you the exact, all these different numbers and exactly where they came from, so that way you know exactly. So yeah, some conservatives have said it was around $150 billion, but most have said it was far lower than that. So another estimate from Iran's central bank topped out at about $29 billion in readily available funds, with another $45 billion tied up in Chinese investment projects and the foreign assets of the Iran's oil ministry. So that's estimating around $74 billion right there from Iran's central bank. After talking with officials at Iran's central bank, Nader Habibi, professor of economics of the Middle East at Brandeis University, believes the actual total is between $25 billion and $50 billion. And in July 2015, U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew told lawmakers Iran would gain access to around $56 billion. So there are all your numbers there. So we had $74 billion, we had heard between $25 and $50 billion, and we had also heard $56 billion in assets. So keep in mind, the U.S. never actually owned these assets. These were assets that were frozen. They were with basically central banks at this point in time. So now let's go to the $1.8 billion. Yeah, so you have that, all those assets basically being freed up due to the lifting of sanctions, somewhere between a range of, let's say, $25 to $75 billion, but not $150 billion like Donald Trump is saying. There's no evidence to back that up whatsoever. And that is not us paying Iran to cooperate. That is us lifting sanctions on assets, and then they gain access back to those assets that were in central or commercial banks overseas, and that's it. That's not the U.S. giving them money. So the $1.8 billion, the Congressional Research Service, the nonpartisan analytic arm of Congress, reviewed this cash transfer in a 2018 report. It gave a total of $1.7 billion. So let's see what this 1.7 was about. That was the amount that the U.S. and Iranian negotiators settled on to resolve an arms contract between the United States and Iran that predated the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Iran had paid for military equipment, and it was never delivered. As of 1990, there were $400 million in that account. Negotiators agreed that accrued interest would add $1.3 billion to the amount, which is a lot of money, but 25 years is a long time for interest to build up in the balance. The United States sent the money to Iran in euros, Swiss francs, and other currencies. Trump embellished when he mentioned barrels and boxes. Reports at the time said the money was packed and loaded onto pallets, similar to how other bulk goods are shipped. So yes, so that was from basically a arms contract that never got resolved. And then interest obviously accrued, and then we added that interest onto the $400 million that was already in the account. So it came to $1.7 billion. So Donald Trump was at least close on that number figure. But once again, he's just acting like we just said, Iran, we'll give you $150 billion, and we'll give you $1.7 billion. And we're just going to dump it off in barrels and boxes, and that's to get you to comply with the Iran deal. We're just going to pay you billions of dollars for the Iran deal, and that way we can get your cooperation out of it. But that's not what happened. That was them getting access to assets again that were frozen because of the punishing sanctions that we had put on Iran due to their nuclear program. So they got access back to those sanctions again, or back to those assets again that were being sanctioned before, around somewhere between most likely 50 to 75 billion, maybe if you go on a low estimate, 25 to 75 billion, but definitely not 150 billion. And then the 1.7 billion was due to an arms deal that never got resolved. So we ended up trying to just make things right and say, all right, let's basically correct all of the wrongs for the most part that we can here. And as assets, that was just going to be a thing that automatically happened. That was the whole incentive to comply with the deal for Iran was, all right, we're going to lift these sanctions that we put on you, which obviously makes sense. So it wasn't like we just backed up the Brinks truck and gave Iran billions of dollars just to basically beg them to comply. No, that it was due to assets being frozen and a bad arms deal. So all of that was paid up. They got their money out of that, and we got them to comply with the Iran deal, which now Donald Trump got rid of. So I just want to clarify those numbers for you because Donald Trump can be extremely misleading with the numbers and obviously exaggerated them a lot there, or at least the first number. The second number he was actually pretty close on. But then he misleads you to basically just think that we just, like I said, backed up the Brinks truck and just gave Iran all this money and said, we'll give you all billions of dollars if you just comply with this deal, and we'll just give you anything you want, basically, is what he's trying to make it seem like. The Obama administration was just cowering and they're just throwing money at Iran saying, all right, we'll give you billions of dollars if you just comply with this Iran deal. But that's obviously not the case. Obviously, Donald Trump exaggerated and completely basically lied about what the situation was again, or at least basically completely augmented the truth. But who would be surprised about Donald Trump doing anything like that at this point?